Recording in progress. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to School of Speech, presented by SpeechTherapyPD. I'm your host, Carolyn Dolby, and I am so glad you're here. School of Speech is where we can come together as school-based SLPs to learn from each other, explore important topics in our field, and keep growing in the work that we do every day. Today's episode feels extra special because this is the first time I have had such a lineup. Oh my gosh, we have six guests joining us for one conversation, which I'm pretty sure when we were discussing it means that we're nearly covering every single time zone. We just need to have Alaska or Hawaii. So if anybody's listening out there live, jump in and let me know if you're in that time zone. That way I can say we've got every time zone covered. All right. Here we go. The title of this episode is What is an Error Anyway? Reframing Persistent Speech Patterns, and together we're going to explore some big questions. Our guests are bringing perspectives from clinical practice, research, teaching, collaboration, and personal experience. Today's discussion is really going to be about reflecting together as a profession, asking questions, challenging some assumptions, and really opening our conversations. So let's take a look at who's here today. All right, let's start with Dr. Philip Combiths. He is an assistant, and I'm sorry if I didn't say that right. He is an assistant professor at the University of Iowa and the director of the Clinical Linguistics and Disparages Lab. Sorry, y'all. It's a long day. End of the day, people. All right, but his work focuses on multilingualism, health disparities. There you go. Come on, Carolyn. And speech language pathology, phonological development, and speech and language interventions. He's the real deal, guys. Next, we have Dr. Carlos Irizarry Pérez, who is an assistant professor in the Speech and Hearing Science Department at the University of New Mexico. And his research focuses on increasing equitable access to services for children with speech sound disorders. Thank you. Jessica Nico's up next. She is a pediatric speech language pathologist, clinical instructor, and a PhD student at the University of New Mexico. Her research interests include autism, echolalia, social communication, neurodiversity, and interprofessional collaboration. Thanks for being here. Matt Phillips, you're up next. Matt Phillips is a person who stutters. He's a speech therapist and a PhD student at Michigan State University. His work focuses on strength-based stuttering therapy and helping individuals become more confident and joyful communicators. I love it. All right, next up on our lineup, Naomi Rodgers. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Naomi. She is an assistant professor at the University of Iowa whose trauma-informed research explores cognitive, emotional, and social aspects of stuttering experiences and therapy. Last but never least, we have Dr. Rick Arenas, also an associate professor at the University of New Mexico, whose research focuses on developmental stuttering and understanding how individuals relate to stuttering within their personal narratives. Hi, everybody. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Super excited. Okay, before we get jumping into our first question, just a little housekeeping, y'all. Each episode of School of Speech is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs through SpeechTherapyPD. If you're joining live, and we got a great big group today, love it. So all of you joining live, if your state requires live CEUs, please be sure to jump onto your speech therapy account at the end of today and complete all the course modules, including the one that says complete course. So I want to make sure that you get credit. And then just a heads up about every now and then, I'm a little talky and our episodes go a little longer, and sorry, not sorry. But if we do go over that 60-minute mark, and you are listening live and you need to jump off, I understand. So don't worry. At the 60-minute mark, if you do need to leave, you can jump off, jump onto the Speech Therapy PD account, complete the course, and you will receive the full credit. So, but We want you to stay if you can, and we love it. And as always, I love hearing from you, and so do our speakers. So if you are listening live, please jump in the chat so we can get it started. Say hi and let us know where you're coming from, especially if you're coming from Alaska or Hawaii, because then I know I'm perseverating on this time zone thing. But while you're jumping in the chat, I'm going to go over the disclosures. I'm Carolyn Dolby. I am a speech language pathologist, and I am a salaried employee of Portland Public Schools. And I receive compensation from SpeechTherapyPD for hosting School of Speech, which I still can't believe I get paid for this. Love it. Rick and Matt have no financial or non-financial relationships to disclose. Carlos and Philip have no financial relationships, but they're both members of ASHA. Me too. Jess holds a degree assistantship at the University of New Mexico, is the grant manager for Dr. Cindy, and the grant project is MESA, and is also a member of ASHA. Way to go. And Dr. Naomi receives a salary from the University of Iowa and volunteers for the National Stuttering Association and Friends. Thank you so much. Oh, look where everyone's coming in from. Hi, everyone. Yay. Love it. All right, here we go. Okay, so I think this conversation is really going to resonate with a lot of our school-based SLPs because we were trained with a really specific framework around speech errors, I think. And so we might have some questions. So I want to start with, and I'm going to direct this first question to Carlos and Philip, please. And everybody else jump in. I mean, this is free for all. I want to start with what made you guys start questioning how we think about errors in speech?
I was like, who's
Do you
starting?
want me to take
You
this
want to
one?
start, Carolyn?
I know. Come
I'll
on.
start it off, and then Philip, please jump in because
Yeah.
Philip was pretty instrumental in this happening as well. And I'll just give you a tiny bit of context as well about myself. I teach our cultural responsivity course, and so I think a lot about neurodiversity, ableism, what is defined as a disability. I also teach our course on speech sound disorders when we're thinking about intervention approaches and diagnoses. These two topics aren't always discussed together, though, the intersection of them. And when I teach my graduate course, we go through the interventions, and every single one of them, the goal is typically increased intelligibility so that the child can communicate their ideas, their thoughts with those around them. And when we get to articulation interventions, it switches. It is defined as socially acceptable speech. And that's always something that kind of made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like, what is socially acceptable speech? Who's defining this? How is this even being measured? And so these kind of things were going on in the back of my mind. A couple years back, I think it was, I was at ASHA and I was watching Philip talk and presenting on ableism. And Philip, of course, is a researcher who works in the same area as me. I think that was kind of the start of the conversation. We met afterwards because we had a shared project together, and I was like, hey, by the way, like, we're talking about neurodiversity. How do we have that discussion within our own professional area? Because I think that there are questions that come up a lot. So those same questions, how do we apply them to children when we are serving them? In what context would we typically, this socially acceptable speech that I think a lot of times is a school-based SLP when I practiced, it was so that we're, protecting the kids from bullying and teasing and things like that typically occur. Yet in what other contexts would we also say to an individual, okay, yes, bullying, teasing is bad, but also change yourself, change the way that you talk. And so how do we have that conversation when intervention is happening? Where's that line? And then we also just know that some individuals don't respond to intervention, don't want intervention, or never get intervention. And so, my question to Philip was, have you been thinking about this as well? Like, And what are your thoughts? And I'll just kind of hand it over to you, Philip, so that you can take it from there.
Yeah, I feel like that. I don't know if I think it was like coffee or lunch after that. I was like, oh, I'm so glad you asked this because it's been running through my head and I have been like waiting to have this conversation with someone. Um, I so I'll say that I'll kind of give a little bit of context that a lot of my research and teaching revolves around language differences or variations, whether we're talking about, like bilingual or multilingual kids or folks who use one of the many varieties of Englishes that we've got going on in the US or around the world. So I feel like I think about language variation or language variety all the time, probably every day. There's about 7,000 different languages spoken in the world. Each of those has any number of different dialects. And every single one of those dialects within those languages has different rules about what sound they use or how they produce the sound or when they produce the sound. Also, words and grammar and all these other things. Um, and linguistically speaking, there's no hierarchy for these things. Like this is better than that. They're just all different ways of producing things. So when we started to talk about this idea of an error,
Mm-hmm.
I really stumble over it, right? Because how do you define an error? I think as SLPs, we feel like, we're using this in some sort of technical way. But that word always carries assumptions about what speech is supposed to sound like. But like, who's defining what speech is supposed to sound like, or what's typical, or what's correct? Historically, and even still today, we're probably most familiar with thinking about this kind of thing with language differences. Thinking, for example, like a bilingual child, right? Like our field has worked really hard in the past 20, 30 plus years to change the way we think about, oh, this child speaks English in a particular way related to all of their unique language experiences. Um, and we cannot simply compare that to what the majority of SLPs are using as their variety of English. As like if you're speaking different from me, that's an error, right? So we were moving away from that in this field, which is awesome. I think we still can agree there's some room to grow there. But I think the same idea illustrates how the concept of error is not static. It depends on context and it changes over time. So we just thought, let's start talking about this when we're talking about um, speech and articulation, especially when we're not talking about things affecting intelligibility, I think was kind of what we landed on. Because you can kind of divide things into that area to really zoom in on an area of speech that creates a lot more questions for folks. Like I'm thinking of one really short little story. Um, I was talking to a friend of mine from grad school, actually, who's an SLP in middle school, and
Bless them.
she was telling me about like a kid, probably preteen, that she was seeing, and they were working on R. Um, and I know many folks could probably even on this call can relate to having kids who are an older school age working on a sound like R, possibly. And she said, uh, we were working on this, and this kid was like seeming a little bit frustrated. And then he said, why can't I just say I'm from Boston? And that's really stuck with me because I think it really exemplifies, yeah, why can't you? Because you're from Boston and you say ka, pak ka, and you're not producing that, post-vocalic R, and that's a characteristic of that dialect. And there are many dialects of English that produce R's differently or don't produce them in certain contexts. Like Boston English, some varieties of New York City English, many
Mhm.
varieties of Southern English, varieties of African American English spoken all over the country. So, even if we are comparing to varieties spoken, what are you comparing to? And it's really got me thinking about this question. And so as to not continue talking forever. I think that gives you an idea why I'm interested in this.
I want to know. Okay, I do like the idea that we're talking about error. What is an error? Is there something, I mean, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead and you were going to tell us or what, but I'm wondering, is there terminology that might be more affirming than error? I mean, error just sounds wrong, literally and figuratively. And you're telling someone you speak wrong. You speak bad. That doesn't feel good in my body, right? So have you guys come up with something else you use?
Yeah, I think that that's an ongoing conversation that we're having. I think that's something that we've discussed often is the idea of like, we don't want to speak for people who produce sounds differently and that we want to have them involved in these conversations as well. So we're taking steps as a team, I think, to incorporate people with lived experience. But I do know that Naomi and Rick took a lot from like the stuttering world. That's informing kind of the approach there. I'm sorry to have jumped in, but I know that this is like an ongoing thing that we talk about at the top of every single one of our meetings.
Thank you. Yeah, because I would like maybe something else. I do have more questions, but the biggest question I'm having right now, I kind of want to know how you guys all know each other. I want your meet cute, and I forgot that's maybe what I should have started with is your meet cute. Like who I don't know. I'm gonna call out on Naomi and Rick and Matt. Okay, you guys, you're up. Would you jump in and let us know
Yeah.
how, look at this group. Tell me
Yeah.
everything.
Okay. Well, so Philip and I work together at the University of Iowa. Rick is from Iowa originally, did all of his degrees here at Iowa. So we go way back. We're like academic siblings. We have this same PhD mentor. And then Matt's getting his PhD, and Matt and Rick and I are all people who stutter, so we all know each other also from the stuttering community. And then you already heard about how everyone else knows each other, so that's that.
Well, I didn't hear about Jess.
Oh,
I missed how
I'm just happy to be here. I'm truly just happy to be here. So I'm over at UNM with Dr. Arenas and Dr. Irizarry Pérez, who are there and are colleagues together. And then as a doc student, one of our requirements is to do a rotation in another lab. So I'm currently in the Autism Spectrum Disorder Lab under Director Cindy Gavarder. And I asked Carlos to do a lab rotation under him. And then he kind of just looped me in, and I'm just having a blast learning from everyone and having a real good time. We had a great time at ASHA. Shout out to anybody in the chat who was at ASHA.
I was there. Yeah. I was there. Yeah.
Shout out.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in here and add a little bit more for Jess because she's being humble. She also does a lot of research and work around neurodiversity, and specifically in the arena of autism. But it made a lot of sense. There's a reason also why our work overlapped and aligned. And so I was pretty excited and honored that she reached out to me. And of course, you heard that like Philip and I already collaborated on, we're collaborating on some projects. So it all just kind of happens organically because Rick is also like across the hall from me and I talk to him a lot. So at some point, I think we're like, let's just have the conversation, everyone together.
Got it. All right. And so, well, who's the leader of this game? Exactly. That's what I love about you guys is that there isn't just a lead. It's sort of a trick question. Y'all, they are all coming in with their own lived experiences and bringing so much to the table. And I love this. Who wants to talk about like interdisciplinary collaboration, or really like what strength? I love collaboration. You guys are all coming in and collaborating. And I loved the overlap of the lived experience. Who wants to kind of tell us a little bit more about the project?
So Naomi, do you want to jump in and kind of talk about the link between the speech sound and stuttering?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, does that sound okay with everybody if we go in that
Yes.
direction?
Oh,
Okay.
big time.
Okay,
Huge
cool.
yes.
Okay. So yeah, I think what has been really helpful as we're kind of navigating into uncharted water a bit here is drawing on the progress in adjacent populations. And so, yeah, as you know, half of us here are in the stuttering world, and in our field, we had been doing a lot of work towards a more stutter affirming approach in terms of our assessments and our interventions. And so the last like 5-10 years we've really seen a big shift. And so we thought, well, we can really get a lot of inspiration from what's happening in the world of stuttering and bring this over to our discussions on persistent speech patterns. And so we thought that this is a really natural pairing because, you know, stuttering and persistent speech patterns are both conditions that affect speech production in a way that is usually observed by listeners and also often judged by listeners. Listeners have certain ideas about, typical ways of talking, and stuttering and articulation differences are outside the norm in that way. So they're often judged by listeners. And also, I think what's really helpful is that in the world of stuttering, we have really adopted the World Health Organization ICF model to like broaden the scope of what we do. Like historically, stuttering therapy was super focused on fluency, right? At the level of the impairment. But wow, in the last 20 years even, we've like really broadened it to look at limitations on participation and environmental factors, personal factors. And there's just been like a huge surge of research into like stigma and concealment and identity and all of these things that we're like, man, I wonder, like, are these things also happening with people who have been in speech therapy for speech sounds and maybe aren't responding to intervention and are living with a speech pattern that may be stigmatized? You know, are they also anticipating and concealing? And we've all these questions about that. And so
Asking and changing words and
yeah.
not using word. Oh my, I did you see, I'm having a huge moment. Good, keep going. I'm so sorry.
So in stuttering, anticipation is a really core part of the lived experience of stuttering. We're often able to feel when we're about to stutter on an upcoming word. And yeah, an unanswered question is like, do people that have articulation differences also kind of scanning ahead, identifying words that are going to be hard for them, and like words swapping, like what we see in stuttering a lot of the time. So there's like lots of potential overlaps. So that we like started to like think about those things. But I'm gonna hand it over to Rick because Rick has some other ideas that I think he'll share also on this link.
Yeah, so from a lot of the conversations that I was having with Carlos as well, I was just hearing just the word like speech sound error, and just that idea of error. It just really drew a big connection to kind of my own experience with stuttering, and particularly growing up. I grew up in the area in the like era when speech therapy was very much fluency based, and so. And it didn't particularly help me a great deal. And it really kind of ingrained this idea that when I stuttered, that I was doing something wrong, that it was a like error. And so I feel like that did actually cause me more harm, going through that process of trying to do these things to get rid of these like errors, and I just couldn't do it. And it wasn't because from a lack of trying, but it was just a thing that, it's just a particular speech pattern that is not going to go away completely, probably, regardless of what you do. And so that framework I felt was unhelpful, to have that perspective that you should be doing things to get rid of stuttering or to speak as fluently as you can at like whatever cost. And so there was never a premium on communication. There was a premium of not actually stuttering. And so that idea of stuttering being viewed as a like error, I think, is a very problematic viewpoint that has changed dramatically. I will agree that our field has come a long way, and I'm over the moon about that, because for a long time I had a very bad view of like our field, even though I was in this field. Like I had a very strong, like, not a good view of it, but it's really changed a great deal. But I think that there are other areas that these types of changes really need to come, like need to be more embraced. And so, like Naomi was saying, I think that stuttering is a really good model of where there has been a dramatic shift in the approach and being able to view kind of communication more holistically, that we talk not to be fluent. Nobody does. You talk to communicate, to make connection. And so making it a goal to talk fluently really takes away from your attention or your ability to focus on the communication. So I'm really hoping that that these types of changes that have happened in the stuttering world can kind of be more embraced in these other areas, like speech sound differences, where if you have a lisp, it may not go away regardless of how hard you try, and it's not impacting your intelligibility. So maybe there's better approaches to go about it, or just kind of let it be, and that's okay.
You brought up two things that I'm thinking about. The first one is I love Nina Reeves and the work she's done with stuttering, and that she uses the term verbal diversity. And I think that is just a wonderful word picture of that. We all don't have to speak the same. And so I'd love to be able to kind of, I love her work, and I've had her on twice, and I just think the world of her and her partner, Scott, colleague partner, Scott, they're doing amazing work too. And so I'd love the idea of verbal diversity, if that could like spread out more. And then I think we would be remiss if we didn't start talking about intelligibility and the impact of intelligibility with a persistent speech error. Like, I think I'd like us to go down that road. Who wants to take on that one?
Before we
do yeah.
Can we jump to Matt? Just because I think
I'm sorry, Matt. I didn't get you. I'm sorry,
Matt.
I get all excited. I'm sorry, Matt. Come on.
No, yeah. So I think to begin and just kind of say a little bit about myself and why I'm involved in this. So like was said, I'm a PhD student and also a speech language pathologist, but I got into the field mostly because I'm somebody who stutters, and I had a lot of speech therapy related to that, and and also as somebody with a persistent speech pattern, a PSP, I'd also had a good amount of speech therapy about speech sound when I was in elementary and middle school, which kind of looked at both of those two things. So so I can kind of come at it with lived experience in both of those sides of things. So I think one of the points that we've mentioned is that with stuttering and these PSPs, the persistent speech patterns, we know that they can persist and continue even when the student has been in speech therapy for a long time. And in the case, especially with stuttering, we know that a good amount of people who stutter won't stop, and that there is no approach that can cure it and sort of totally have them be fluent. So even in the face of continued therapy, that's not a feasible goal that one day you'll be able to speak totally fluently all the time, even with the best type of speech therapy. And I think that a lot of what's been talked about is the shift away from these fluency-focused approaches to focusing more on the life impact and avoidance and life participation and things like that. And I think the same thing can be true of students who have speech sound differences, especially if they're maybe not responding to the speech therapy in the way that you might expect them to. So I think that the prolonged nature of some of the speech therapy that kids might be in can pose like some interesting questions or dilemmas. I think on the one hand, I'm not opposed to prolonged speech therapy as long as progress is being made and it's valued by the client. So I think in my experience, I was in speech therapy since I was like a preschool kid, basically through middle school, and that was a lot of the traditional fluency focused approaches for us stuttering. And it wasn't until I was at the end of high school that I kind of switched to doing something focused more on avoidance reduction therapy. And I think that even though I did avoidance reduction therapy for a couple of years, I think that because I was noticing change and I was doing things that I wasn't doing in the past, I was feeling more confident. I felt like my speech was less struggled. I felt like even though I was in it for a couple of years, I could see the change that was happening. That wasn't necessarily happening when I was in elementary school, focusing on trying to be fluent, focusing on speech sound goals related to an distortion. So if I think about that, like being in speech therapy for so long, especially in elementary and middle school, and not feeling like I was making a ton of progress in either of the goals, it was definitely frustrating and did kind of like, what's the point of continuing this if I know what I quote unquote should be doing? But in the case of stuttering, you can do it in the speech room, but the second you leave and you actually want to use them in maybe a important situation, they suddenly fall apart and you maybe can't use the easy onsets or the light contacts. So I think that just being in speech therapy for so long and having it feel ineffective definitely led to some of those feelings of frustration on both sides of things. And I think that that's kind of the challenge is when it's prolonged and ineffective in the sense that the client's not feeling like it's helping them and it's beginning to get to the point of feeling like, what's the point of continuing this? So I think that that's definitely a discussion that that the students can be involved in. I do recognize that, the way that the education and the special education system is set up, it does impose some challenges. And let's say the kid wants to take a break, it might be difficult to implement that if the student's IEP says that they should be seen like X amount a week, and if then the parents might be reluctant to maybe rescinding that if they feel like they might have a difficult time getting them back into speech. So I do know that there are some logistical challenges, but I think definitely something that can be considered. Yeah.
I now have a million more questions, which are just wonderful. And then this is what I thought this conversation was going to do, is to get us thinking. And we're not going to have answers to everything. We're just going to have more questions, but that is what is going to build our awareness and move us forward. So yes, in IEPs, it does say, what are the benefits, but it also has a part in the IEP that says, what are the possible harmful effects? And I think we kind of jump over that, or just smooth over that, and we don't really talk about that. So that's one thing, that's a conversation. A second thing, when you were, Matt, thank you so much. When you were talking about like taking a break, and I was just talking about this, that with another colleague, being school-based, yeah, everything is always like, you've got to do it for, 30 minutes twice a week, for whatever it is, right? And I was talking about, like, what if, like, we really, through this IEP as an individual, it's individual. And if you did something like for the first, like, let's say their IEP cycle started in October, right? And so maybe for the first quarter of that first cycle, the first grading period, you did a certain amount of time, or the first year, whatever. And then you did have that break. Or maybe this is a student that's an older student, is to not have it weekly. Or there are ways we can do it. I just think that we get so stuck in that we've always done it this way. Well, we don't have it. Is it really right? Is there an error in our ways, if you will, right? In that we can do things better. Now, this still brings me back to the word error. And I'm hearing y'all say some different things, like speech sound differences, sound patterns, where are we going with that? I don't know.
I might jump in here. I think that, like Jess kind of mentioned this, like we grappled with this term. And there's been multiple variations. I think the literature tends to talk about residual speech errors, persistent speech errors. They have slightly subtle definitions. Sometimes it may or may not matter, often get lumped together, but they both include this error piece. And kind of like Philip was talking about, if we think, like, take a linguistic lens to it, what we're really talking about are patterns. If we separate the judgment piece. And so we've kind of adopted this term persistent speech patterns as a working title,
Okay.
I guess, at the moment, to remove that error piece from it for that specific reason, as we, I think, are talking with adults, and I'm just trying to understand their lived experiences, like Naomi was mentioning, because that has been one of our questions, and we have been collecting interviews around that. And then, as we're talking about this with you and other people, like, we do need a term. It's just like, what is that best one, and how do we have one that is inclusive of the individuals, that we are working with?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for
If
that
anybody,
clarity.
if anybody out there wants to throw any ideas into the chat, that'd be great.
Yeah, give us, yeah, I'm down for that. For sure. I also, oh, the back to something, Matt, that you were saying about just being in speech for so long. I think sometimes in schools, we have parents, and I'm not saying I am not talking about your mama, not at all, not at all. I'm just saying, like hypothetically, we have parents that are like, I don't want them not to be in speech, right? They don't want to let that go. And I think that we need your think tank. And I think your lived experiences, y'all, not just Matt, everybody's here, giving us that power behind why we might be suggesting taking a break or involving the student more. I think that is something that we really should do. Because I think that is one of those prongs on evidence-based is your client, is your student. What is their, what are they wanting? And I know that, you know, parents are by proxy standing in, but at what point we're expecting the students to take autonomy of, right? So then can we not give them more autonomy on their speech? Now, this isn't the same as little Carolyn Dolby here, who wasn't very good in math and would, if someone said you don't need to take math, I would have been out immediately. So it's not that, but I mean, we still need, you know, reading, writing, and all of that. And so I'm not saying, oh, if a kid is like, I don't want to do speech, and just be like, oh, okay, never mind. You know, we're not talking like that. We're talking about students that that should have a voice, and understanding their perspective. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Oh, sorry.
Can I jump in real quickly? Because I think you mentioned something earlier that's really important about like the IEP when we think about the benefits, and a lot of times we don't think about the costs.
Yes.
And I think sometimes that can be a good way to introduce that conversation or that topic, because I think one of the things we're learning with adults is even when children or adults can change the patterns in their speech, that there is still a cost potentially, one in which is like cognitive load, if nothing else.
Sure.
And so when we start to kind of think about those benefits in the costs and ask what are the priorities, that can potentially be a way to start that conversation. We right now are working with a family because we want to understand some questions around generalization, but part of it is also like we want to understand how to include children in that process actually. And we have adapted some tools from stuttering that ask the child how they feel about their speech, how is it impacting them socially. And one of the things that really stuck with me was what one of the parents said. We want them to, you know, we want speech therapy for them, of course, but what we don't want is for their self-esteem in some way to be the cost of accuracy of pronunciation. And I think that really stuck out to me as the client value there that can help guide then some of those decisions.
I have a personal lived experience on that. I came from Australia. I know I've said the story before, but it really fits here. And I had a strong accent. I'm going to say this really fast. And I spoke differently. I had a dialect, and the word was there. I would say over that. And I was in 4th grade. And my teacher said, say it again, say it again, say it again. From 4th grade on, all through the rest of school, I would not read out loud. I wouldn't do it. And it wasn't until I went to college, and then this is kind of funny, but I joined a sorority. I know, no big surprise. And I was voted chaplain. And all of a sudden I'm in this, and I had to read. And that moment, I just was like, I just gave myself chills. Anyway, so that one little thing telling me that I was wrong affected my entire education. Like anyway, so thank you for letting me share, but there is some harmful effects to that. Ooh,
No,
okay,
I think
sorry.
thank you for sharing that actually.
Thank you for sharing it.
That actually kind of like, Jess, you can probably talk about this. Like we are hearing similar stories around, you know, how adults and children feel about like a lisp or, you know, whatever articulation difference they have too in the same way.
Yeah, even when I love hosting, and when I start reading, I have anxiety about it, and I love that. Like I love doing this. I love it. But then I was like, I'm gonna mess up their names. I'm gonna mess up their names. I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do something funny. So the struggle is real. So it's like the stuff is real. So anyway, I don't want to derail this too much, but because I'm hearing like, yes, I like the idea of persistent speech patterns rather than persistent speech errors. I like that. But I do really want us to talk about the relationship with the concept of persistent speech errors and intelligibility. Like, can we bring that together for our listeners?
I guess, well, I'm sort of wondering what your question is, but I'll start with, intelligibility being, hey, like, is your speech understandable to others, right? And I think the intelligibility piece we're getting at here is really just about difference versus like impact,
Okay.
right? So like, um, I don't want to misquote the study, but there was a study by Hitchcock and some of their colleagues that was a survey study looking at the social emotional impact of, um, I think they termed them residual speech errors in that study. And what you were seeing was, you know, an impact. Impact was seen like in things like, oh, when I'm communicating with my friends, I may not communicate in this way, or I may avoid these kinds of activities because of the way that I communicate. That's an impact. Um, but then they were also describing things like that were differences, right? So, I speak differently from other people. And I think part of what we're trying to do here is just tease these two things apart. You can speak differently, and if you are if you are in a supportive environment and you have the resources, whether that's through therapy or through support groups or family or friends, to have that confidence in the way that you communicate and in the right scenario, like that difference does not need to have a detrimental impact. Like that detrimental impact can come from all these other factors. Um, and so if we just start with terminology, right? If we remove just defining something as an error,
Yeah.
then you open up the ability to think about it in this way, and to have those conversations with people, um, with intelligibility specifically. I don't want to misestimate numbers, so I'll speak generally. But generally speaking, when we're talking about these older kids, right, like 8+ or 9 years plus, who have one or maybe two sounds that are produced differently. Most often in English, these are going to be like R,
Yeah.
or some of the sibilants like S. Like when most of the time these are not have if they're having any impact on intelligibility, it's very small. But in many cases, it's measured as not impacting intelligibility. And since we purport kind of intelligibility as what we're targeting, it puts us in this weird place of like, well, then what's justifying this other than that doesn't sound like the way I speak this or the way most people speak this, you know? And this is just a question. We don't purport answers, but I think it's nice to start asking questions like this, and that kind of intelligibility, the role of intelligibility or not in this kind of, I think, is fuel for that conversation. I don't know if I've addressed your question.
No, you did. Well, you did in a way to make me think of more questions, which is exactly what
Good.
your group is about. Like, that's what this entire discussion is about, not having answers as much as just start thinking more. Because I'm thinking, like that are, and kids that students are in for life, it seems like, with the R. And I loved the way that you framed the intelligibility and impact. Really, we need to look at the impact. And if we start looking at it as communication, right? We're speech language pathologists. We have a degree in communication disorders, communication, right? And so we're looking holistically at the student. How I don't know. I have so much in me right now that I can't get it out of my mouth.
I love how you like tapped into the disorder piece, because we are pathologists. What we do is inherently to pathologize, right? It's in our title. So like where do we lie within how does just the entire medical model, right, fit into what we do as people working with these people?
Right. Okay. So then if you think about it being, our listeners are school-based, so it is school-based, but let's just think about medical for a second. Even when you go to the doctor, there's a range, right? Isn't there always a range of stuff? And like, I think it's harder when we're looking at that speech sound. It seems to be a zero-sum game, right? Either it's right or it's wrong. And I think you're opening a thought of like, is there more than, I don't know, because now my mind is blown, because I don't know if I'm going down the right way or not. Are you saying at some point we're not going to say it's not say error or wrong. We're going to start. Oh, okay. I think I got it. Hold on. Sorry, my mind's blowing. That there is a difference, but rather than looking just at the error, we're looking at the impact for the student
Yeah, and
their communication. Am I getting it?
I think so. I think we asked some of the participants in our qualitative study. We had 7 adult participants who who continue to produce sounds differently into adulthood. And one of our final questions that we asked was, what do you want people to know about, having a persistent speech pattern, or what do you want SLPs to know, right? And one of my favorites, I'm going to quote one of our participants. She said, "My hope is that both to the kids with speech differences and to those around them will know everyone is different." I think so much of like our education system and society is built around the idea of a mythical norm, and it doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist for anything, whether it's how people say things. There are many number of dialects, accents, speech differences, someone being tired. There's so many reasons why people could sound different than the norm, but like just recognizing that the norm doesn't exist and it's a myth takes power from it. So all that said, I want to encourage the empathy and embracing of differences. And when you stop thinking that the norm exists, you can stop sort of glorifying it, and that differences are rad. So it's the idea, like you said, neurodiversity exists, verbal diversity exists, whatever the term that you said earlier. Diversity is inherent, and whenever it is pathologized in a way, I feel like we're kind of radical and who is usually favored, right? And who creates the norm and why? Asking those kind of critical questions.
That is heavy, and that is the conversation. Yes.
And just to piggyback on that, I think that our field needs to appreciate the amount of power that they have when they send a message like that this is a like error, or just even those words that are used. We are the people that create those norms. Like our field is literally the ones that identify and classify in all of those things, and so it is on us to make those changes. And so if whoever is out there listening to this, I do hope that you take that like responsibility that it is on you, and that you should be very mindful how you talk to the kids in your school and how you present any changes that you're trying to encourage them to make, that you have a lot of power in the way that they're going to view that and the way that they're going to internalize that. And it's a lot of responsibility. And I think that our field needs to really to acknowledge that and to take that very, very seriously.
Well said, Rick. Words matter. Words matter. Semantics, right?
No.
And how we approach things as the speech language pathologist. I think, I mean, we have a lot of power, if you will, which of course just reminded me of another story of me. I was a kindergarten teacher before I became a speech path, and we were doing a little theme on community helpers and talking about everybody has a job. And all of a sudden, one of the little boys goes, oh, I was married at the time. So he goes, Mrs. Hernandez, are you God's boss? I mean, the power that I had right then is, especially with our littles, we have got to think about that. Yes. And so I was like, oh gosh, no, God's my boss too. God's my boss too. So that always reminds me of how much power we have with our kids, right? Oh, Demani, thank you for jumping in. Communication is key, not so much how we speak.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you.
To kind of like go off of a little bit about what you had just been saying and what had been saying, like I think SLPs are like well-intentioned people. I think we all went into the field to help people, but I think if like we go back to like even the experience that you showed out of just that one instance in class, and like and how that impacted you for a long time. And then if you think of these students who are in speech for a long time, if I think back to my own experience for both stuttering and speech sound, I was doing the same thing in speech for a long time. And and when the success was either talking fluently and using my tools, of saying this sound in the way that like it's quote unquote supposed to be said, it was a lot of things that I failed at each week. I wasn't getting a lot of successes. So I think that like on top of that, I think that goes back to like the language that's used, how it's discussed in the speech session, I think can definitely go a long way as well.
I
So
think
true.
this is a good example, like, of like we don't need all the answers to all these questions. We're having to start doing things now. And I think that's kind of where my head is at here with these really important points that Rick and Matt have both kind of highlighted. The words we use matter. So even like we don't have to answer all the questions about like when is it appropriate to work on the sound with this individual and when is it not. Those are difficult questions and we need more information, frankly. But we do know some things, right? We know that centering what you're doing on the individual in front of you and their experience and their goals is something we should always be doing and can really help in this scenario. Thinking about how you approach asking someone to modify the way that they communicate, and making sure that what you're doing is consistent with their goals, but also just think about the language, right? Like we've talked about this term error. Maybe don't use that word when you're working with someone. I feel like in this school-based context, certainly, I can't think of a lot of situations where you really need that word. And I'm thinking about my like a clinical mentor of mine who was my supervisor in schools when I was in graduate school. Her name is Jennifer Taps Richard, and I remember her teaching me. We don't call it like, right or wrong. We say like, this is the new way you're doing this, and that was the old way you were doing it. Like something more value neutral, as simple as that, makes a big difference if you're just not using those words that carry all of this stigma. Because even if it's a little, every time you're using it, you're kind of compounding that to that individual. And even if you have a goal to get somewhere, they're a communicator right now. And how do they feel about communicating right now the way that they communicate? Kind of regardless of what your goal is, you need to support that as well. And so if you just go in thinking about these things and ask questions and check in and check on yourself about the words that you're using, like you're making a difference already. And that's kind of my little takeaway of tips about that.
I love that. I think, right. We're here to get us to think. I liked thinking about words that are value neutral. I liked that term. Thank you, Philip. And also you are putting the challenge to us as speech pathologists to think about how we do approach our therapy, and to bring it more student-centered, and really what is important to them. And I do know, oh, and Alyssa too, just jumped in and she says she loved the way you said, the new way versus, we're going to do the new way, and the old way. That's kind of like a good way of saying, like, we've got a new way of doing this. This is another, hey, let's look at maybe doing it another way. And versus like, oh, right, like tick, wrong. Oh man, I'm just thinking about when never mind. I'm not going to call myself out about doing like tokens that were double.
Yeah, back to back, red and green. And I think, yeah, and I think
You know
that
what?
another
We're
thing,
not saying we're wrong, just do better. Sorry, Jessica, come on in.
well, that's what I was going to say, is that idea that, like, now that we're thinking about these things, it's just an opportunity for change, right? It's not we shouldn't, I think it's easy to put value judgments on ourselves and say, how could I have done that? I judge myself often, but the idea of like know better, do better, is that the term?
Yes. When you know better, we do better.
Yeah. So exactly.
And I love what you just said. We are agents of change. And that is part of our job, is to not do things the way that they've always been done just because that's the way they've always been done. We really need to be, that's why, thank you to all of our listeners. They're coming here, they're wanting to learn and change and grow. We've got a lot of veteran SLPs, not just new and up and coming. I mean, we have to change with change is good. And it's hard for us. It's hard for a lot of us to change because it's uncomfortable. But what are we asking our students to do every day? Change.
I think
Wow.
that empathy is super important.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing for the child to literally change systematically the way they are speaking around one or multiple sounds. And it's also a really hard thing as a clinician to like take on. And I remember when I practiced, I always felt this like pressure. I had to change it. I had to get it right. And if there was something wrong, like with, I don't know, my strategy or with me as a, SLP, if I didn't. And just shifting that perspective of how we're treating ourselves and, interacting with each other as like just human beings can go a long way.
God, thank you. Thanks for adding that. I hate that we are towards the end now and we're going to have to start wrapping it up. And I hate it because, I mean, this conversation is just, I think the biggest takeaway is that this is a conversation that's not ended. This is really just the beginning of more conversations. And that's what well, first of all, you guys did it. You're the heroes here. You achieved what I was hoping for, which was to open more questions, to open more conversation, to get us to start really thinking about things more. Just really think about our own assumptions and really listening. I mean, you guys with your lived experiences and looking at another way of doing things really gives us pause to think about our own clinical decisions. And I love that, like thinking about our approach and how we modify. We're not saying anybody's in error. No, in how we do things. We're just saying, think about how you're doing it and think about the impact you have on what you're doing. And then think about the impact that the student has and what is the impact of their communication. I love it. I think that's one of the reasons I love being a speech pathologist, is that we are in motion and we're always changing. And every day is a brand new day for me, in my work. And I love that. That's the reason why I like to get up and go, because I'm never really sure what's going to happen. I want to thank you guys personally, each one of you. Thank you. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Matt, Jessica, Naomi, Rick. This has been fantastic. And I know that our listeners are so thankful. I want to thank our listeners too for coming and listening and being open to hear this conversation and to bring this conversation back to your colleagues. And I'd love to hear back from anyone and that we can share, especially some other ideas. And I'd love for you guys to come back because this, I think this was the tip of the iceberg, y'all. Tip. So I just want to thank everyone's saying thank you. Everyone's like in awe. We've had such a great night. This has been wonderful. But I hate to say it, but we do have to say goodbye. But before we go, I would be remiss. If you are listening live and you are at a state that needs live CEUs, please don't forget to jump back onto your Speech Therapy PD account and finish those modules because we want to make sure that you get all the credit. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, guests. Thank you. This has been a wonderful. And listeners, thank you so much. And I hope to see everybody next time on School of Speech. Bye, guys.